All rise, please stand. Oh yes, this Honorable Superior Court for the County of Wake is now convened and sitting for a special memorial session. The Honorable Judge Brian Collins Jr., President and presiding. Oh yes, God save the state, this Honorable Court. Please be seated. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, members of the bar. Good afternoon, Madam Clerk. Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Deputy Donnelly. I want to welcome everyone to this special ceremonial session of the Wake County Superior Court. It's a great honor and a pleasure for me to preside over this ceremony in which we honor and celebrate the lives of our departed colleagues. Since it's a special session of court, I want to invite you to move about as you would, take pictures, laugh, cry, just make yourself at home. And I want to turn this ceremony over to the President of the 10th Judicial District Bar, Jake Epstein.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jake Epstein. I'm the President of the 10th Judicial District Bar. And good afternoon. Thank you for being here. And welcome. This is, these memorial sessions, they mean a lot to us, to our members. We like them. We've been doing them for a long time. And it's important to us to honor and celebrate and hear about the contributions that our members who have passed away have made, and to spend some time thinking about it. Now, our bar is not only the biggest district bar in this state, but it's also one of the most professional and most accomplished, and that is because of our members. And some of these members you'll hear about today. We hope that you'll take some time to listen to it, hear some stories, reflect on it, leave with a smile and a sense of gratitude for all they've done, and all that they've accomplished while they were working as part of our bar and in the community. I do want to thank Judge Collins, the court staff, and also Mary Winstead and the Memorials Committee that do all the heavy lifting to put these together and connect with everybody and make them what they are. I also want to say a special thank you to families and friends of the members or past members who are here today and are allowing us to do this. Being a lawyer takes a lot of time, takes lawyers away from families and friends in order to do this important work, and we thank you for sharing them with us during their lives. It's meaningful to spend just a few moments that we can all get together with you and share this time and hear a little bit about not only what they've done for the profession, but also what they've done for the community. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chair of our Memorials Committee, Mary Winstead.
Thank you, Jake. As chair of the Memorials Committee, I also want to welcome everyone to this special memorial session of court. Our local bar holds these special sessions of court throughout the year to honor members of our bar who are no longer with us. You know, it's the rare attorney, and I'm just going to pick up on something Jake said, it's the rare attorney whose job responsibilities end at the stroke of 5 every day. The practice of law involves personal sacrifice and often time away from family and missing important events. These sessions of court not only honor our deceased former colleagues, but also are our way of saying to you, their families, that we appreciate your sacrifices as well as theirs. We often mention at these sessions that your loved ones spend sometimes as much time with other attorneys walking these halls and in these courtrooms as with their families. And so it is fitting that we pay them tribute in this space. The 4 esteemed attorneys that we honor today have been memorialized in other ways and at other services. But this special session of court is different because it allows our bar to celebrate the lives of our members with you, their families, their friends, and their colleagues, and to hear of their contributions to the community and to our profession. We have all heard the poem, the dash, that speaks of the dash between one's date of birth and date of death. In the poem, we are told that what matters most is the dash between the years and how we spend it. I have no doubt that in this hour you will hear of some remarkable ways that the dashes were lived. And it is those dashes that we want to honor today. Hopefully, this time will be a welcomed opportunity for reflection and remembrance, as well as time to share a laugh or two. We collectively pause from the business of meting out justice in these courtrooms and all that comes with that to honor 4 attorneys who are no longer with us, but each of whom contributed their time and gifts to the legal profession and left a legacy that we want to honor. Our first honoree is Elisha Speedy Harry Bunting Jr., and he will be remembered by Ann Reed Dunn.
Elisha Harry Bunting Jr., known professionally as Harry, but to his friends and family as Speedy, and that the nickname Speedy was not because he was fast or slow even, it was because that was what his dad was called. Anyway, he was born in Newbern in 1945, and he died here in Raleigh, where he spent most of his life in the summer of 2022. Speedy attended UNC for undergraduate school and graduated in 1967. This, of course, was right in the middle of the Vietnam War, so after he graduated, Speedy joined the Air Force. His obituary says he served in Vietnam, but that's just a little bit misleading. He was super smart, and he must have aced some of those language aptitude tests because he was sent to a school where they taught the languages of the combatants, and of course, never taking the easy way out, Speedy decided to study Mandarin Chinese. He obviously became proficient enough because what he did during the war was intercept messages between the combatants, our enemies, that they were exchanging. After Speedy fulfilled his military obligations, he came home and went to law school, again at UNC, and he graduated in 1974. He decided on a career in the public sector and got a job in the North Carolina Department of Justice. At the time, there were only 3 lawyers doing tort claims, and that was all of the tort claims and workers' comp claims that were filed against the state of North Carolina. He was really good at his job. His clients in the state agencies liked him, and even more than that, they trusted him, and they knew that he would give their cases his full attention, in spite of the fact that he had a huge caseload. He was a welcome addition to the staff because he had a great sense of humor, though it was obviously a very self-effacing sense of humor. He and his wife Betsy also began a tradition that was so important that it's actually outlived both of them. They started a party, an annual Christmas wine and cheese party. And that included many, many members of the staff. I don't know how they fit all those people in their house, but the parties were always fun, and I can trace a lot of friendships back to those parties. Some of us, in fact, continue to get together in the Bunting's honor every holiday season, though we have a much smaller party. Speedy did tort claims work and workers' comp cases for several years, and during that time the section more than doubled in size. But he was always ready for a challenge, so he decided to transfer to the Highway Division where he handled condemnation cases. I think he really loved that work, but the Attorney General had other ideas. And when the supervisor of the tort claims section retired, the Attorney General called Speedy and asked him to take over the management of the section. Now, tort claims are hard cases. You've always got, and workers' comp cases, you've always got some unhappy citizen who claims that the state has injured him in some way. And the attorneys in the tort claims section always have huge caseloads. But there was a limit there's always been a limit on the state's liability. It's much larger now, but in those days, it was more in the nature of $30,000 and then later $50,000. So because of that, and because the cases were heard in an administrative forum, the North Carolina Industrial Commission, the tort claims section was considered a training ground for young lawyers, a place where they could come and learn how it's done. Speedy was a great mentor for these lawyers. He believed in his team and genuinely cared about every one of them. In fact, they would come to him for advice about everything, even their love lives. He always supported them and helped them advance their careers at every opportunity, especially when it gave them the opportunity to shine outside the section. I see one person here who was one of the two of Speedy's subordinates who started the internship program. That was a program that was used throughout the Attorney General's office for many years. And in fact, Governor Stein and the First Lady Anna Stein met for the first time at one of these internship functions. Felicia Hoover is here, and she could tell us about that. As for supporting his folks, Speedy did things like help one of his attorneys move from her apartment into her new house. Clearly, that was above and beyond the call of duty, but there's an even more typical example of what Speedy was like. For some reason, and I have no idea what that reason was, some of the folks in the tort claims section decided one day to light some sparklers inside the building. The result of this escapade was not surprising. The fire alarm went off and the whole building had to be evacuated. The fire safety guy was not amused, and he wanted to write up the culprits. Well, Speedy came to bat for them, and the end result was that the person who was written up was Speedy. He was a bit of a masochist, you might observe. I attended the memorial service for Speedy in New Bern, and in fact, Cecil Harrison and my husband were two of his lifelong friends, and they both spoke at that service. And they shared their comments with me, and what I noticed was that both of their comments came down to the same thing that I emphasized, and that is that Speedy's most enduring and endearing trait was his unconditional and unquestioned loyalty. We saw proof of that during his final years when his wife Betsy became gravely ill. She was on life support for days at a time, and her doctors even told Speedy that they would support a decision to put her on life support, to put her on hospice. He refused to do that adamantly and devoted all of his time to helping her recover. Betsy's recovery was a slow and very stressful process. She was in and out of intensive care many times and in the hospital for literally months at a time. She said later that she knew Speedy was what made the difference for her in her recovery. Speedy Bunting, I should have introduced his brother Bill Bunting, and Bill's wife Sandra, who are here today with us. But Speedy was much shorter than Bill, but he was still a very big man. He was 6'7", and he had a really big heart. He loved his work and probably took too much of it on himself. Eventually, he learned he couldn't do it all and learned how to delegate some of it. But where Betsy was concerned, Speedy honored his vows right to the end and made sure that she had the best possible care. Eventually, his great big heart gave out. But he wouldn't, I know, we all know who love Speedy, that he wouldn't have it any other way. Even so, when he died, we all knew that we had lost a good friend and a good man, and we all treasure our memories of him. Thank you.
Next, Elizabeth Cochrane Bunting will be remembered by Thomas J. Ziko.
Mr. Epstein, Ms. Winstead, family and friends of our departed colleagues. Good afternoon. I'm Tom Ziko. Betsy Bunting was a colleague and friend of mine for 45 years. I'm a Duke grad, so I can't say whether it happens by nature or nurture. But there's no doubt that Elizabeth Reynolds Cochrane, Betsy Bunting, was a Carolina girl. Betsy was born in Charlotte in March of 1949. Her childhood friends and classmates in the Myers Park neighborhood remember her as a vivacious and energetic girl. The brace she wore, to support a leg weakened from infantile polio, did not prevent her from being a leader and winner in swimming, bicycling, and various street games, including one of my childhood favorites, Roll the Bat. In 1967, Betsy graduated from Myers Park High School and enrolled at Carolina. That began a formal relationship that would continue until the end of her life. Betsy thrived in Chapel Hill. She immersed herself in her studies and the life in her Kappa Delta sorority. In 1971, Betsy graduated from Chapel Hill with a degree in journalism and enrolled at UNC Law School. It's notable that Betsy began her legal education at the same time that Governor Scott and President Friday were creating the University of North Carolina system. Betsy's legal career was destined to be inextricably intertwined in the growth of the University of North Carolina. Betsy graduated from law school in 1974. To put that date in context, her bar number was 6083. Bar numbers are now over 63,000. Justice Susie Sharp tapped Betsy to be her first female law clerk. In her biography, Justice Sharp flatly denied being a feminist. So we can say to a certainty that Betsy was not a DEI hire. Since Betsy was a Carolina girl, her story must include basketball. In Betsy's case, her affections for the Tar Heel basketball went beyond just rabid cheering in Carmichael. In law school, Betsy had met Harry Bunting, whom Ann Reed just memorialized. And to my knowledge, Harry had played freshman ball at Carolina in the 60s. While I wouldn't say that Betsy married Harry because he played ball at Carolina, I wouldn't say it didn't play a part in her decision either. But no matter Betsy's motives, their union was loving and enduring. Betsy and Harry remained married and cheered Carolina until Harry's death in 2022. After working and learning from Justice Sharp, in 1976, Betsy joined the education section of the North Carolina Office of Attorney General. As an associate AG in the education section, Betsy was responsible for representing and advising officers and staff on all 16 campuses of the University of North Carolina system. It was during her 8 years in the education section that Betsy honed her skills as an advisor, litigator, and appellate advocate. She had plenty of opportunities to display her talent. By my count, during her time in the education section, Betsy argued more than 25 cases in North Carolina appellate courts in the Fourth Circuit. Eddie Spees, who was head of the education section, mentored and supervised both Betsy and me. Eddie tells the story of one of Betsy's appearances in the Fourth Circuit. As you all know, after your argument in the Fourth Circuit, in one of those fancy Richmond courtrooms with the silver pitchers, the judges come down to greet the attorneys. Mr. Spees says that after one of Betsy's arguments, the judges came down, shook Betsy's hand, and told her, "Ms. Bunting, we're holding an informal contest for the best oral argument, and as of today, you're winning." In 1984, Betsy left the AG's office to accept an appointment as Special Assistant and Associate Vice President for Legal Affairs to President Friday. If you've been listening, I don't need to tell you how much Betsy loved that work. Events over the past couple of years have thrust university legal issues into the forefront of our consciousness. They're on the front pages and in the nightly news. But in 1984, the law of higher education was just evolving. Betsy and the attorneys at the UNC system were pioneers in the field. Drawing on her litigation experience and her phenomenal legal research and writing skills, Betsy became a respected advisor to President Friday, his successors, and chancellors across the university system. As the years went by, the legal offices of the UNC campuses grew. Betsy became a trusted advisor and mentor for a host of attorneys that joined the UNC system. When I reached out to the attorneys for comments on Betsy, their gratitude and affection for her guidance and friendship was heartwarming and sincere. One said, "I was a young female attorney when Betsy took me under her wing. She mentored and guided me as I grew into my role as general counsel. Not only was Betsy an expert in higher education law, but she was wise. She provided me with invaluable advice, not only on the law, but on how to implement the letter of the law in a reasonable and sustainable fashion." Another campus counsel emphasized Betsy's skills in effective counseling and mediation. One general counsel said, "In tense and adversarial circumstances, Betsy's legal and personal gifts transformed conflicts into meaningful dialogues and enduring resolutions." Betsy proved to be such a valuable asset to the university system that after she retired from her position as vice president for legal affairs, she accepted appointments as interim general counsel at several UNC campuses. True story. Harry and Betsy lived across the street from me for decades. One day, after Betsy had retired, I asked Harry, where was she? He said, "Well, on Mondays I drive her to Greensboro, where we've rented an apartment. She works on campus all week, and on Friday I drive back and pick her up and bring her home." I said, "Well, that doesn't sound like much of a retirement." He said, "You don't know the half of it. She doesn't want to mess up her state retirement benefits, so she does it for free." To which all I can say is, greater love hath no attorney than she will lay down her fee for a client. Betsy's contribution to North Carolina went well beyond her work with UNC. She served multiple terms on the Board of Bar Examiners. I suspect that more than one of you is likely indebted to Betsy for your license. She was an avid traveler and art collector, which made her a respected docent at the North Carolina Museum of Art for many years. In the end, I'm confident to say that Betsy loved Carolina all her life, and Carolina loved Betsy because of her life. The University of North Carolina and the entire state are better because of Betsy's work. Thank you for your attention, and God bless Betsy Bynum.
Richard Chase Hatch will now be remembered by M. Keith Kapp.
Judge Collins, Mr. President, Madam Chair, it is my honor, at the invitation of the family of Richard C. Hatch, to present a memorial remarks on his behalf on this special session of the Wake County Superior Court. Richard Chase Hatch, known as Dick Hatch to his family and friends, was born in Holton, Maine, by the Canadian border on the 10th of December, 1928. He graduated from Bowdoin College in 1950 and Columbia University Law School in 1953. Following law school, he served with the United States Army in Germany. He had a distinguished and long career in corporate law. He started his legal career in maritime law in New York City and soon moved to air transportation. His first in-house counsel position was with Kapp, also known as Civil Air Transport. It was an interesting time working to be at Kapp. Towards the end of the work with Kapp, he realized he was inadvertently working for the Central Intelligence Agency. Kapp was surreptitiously purchasing air cargo equipment for the CIA's covert efforts in Cambodia and Vietnam. Dick never discussed with me in detail what he did. He did suggest I watch Air America, starring Mel Gibson and Robert Downing Jr., which is based on the exploits of Kapp. I recommend the movie to you. When you fellow lawyers watch it, think of Dick as that corporate lawyer handling the licenses and contract for the purchases of all those Pilatus Porter Stoll aircraft for a domestic airline. STOL, by the way, is the acronym for Short Takeoff and Landing. Following his work with Kapp, he joined Mohawk Airlines. These were very good times for Dick, working with the corporate team that grew Mohawk Airlines until it eventually merged beneficially to its shareholders with Allegheny Airlines and then merged with US Air, now American Airlines. He relished the corporate transactions and dutifully handled litigation, including cases involving crash fatalities. After his work at Mohawk Airlines, he was offered the opportunity to come to work as a corporate counsel for the General Electric division in Burlington, Vermont. In Burlington, General Electric was building the first nose gun for the A-10 attack aircraft known as the Vulcan Cannon, a 20-millimeter Gatling gun. This General Electric facility was also known as a proving and testing ground for corporate counsel. He only spent 3 years in Vermont, apparently passing muster as a GE corporate counsel. He was relocated to Syracuse, New York, where he was the general counsel for GE's EDS, that is, Electronic Detection System Division. He spent many years there when it was a thriving campus until Jack Welch came into the helm of GE. Welch terminated the EDS division of GE. Dick was devoted to the Syracuse committee. He did some private practice gigs for a couple of years in association with friends. Fortuitously, especially for the Tar Heel State, Dick's wife, Diana, known to her friends as Dee, was offered a senior position at UNC Public TV, where my wife, Chancey, worked. It is through this connection that I first met Dick at a recruitment dinner between the two couples in Chapel Hill. The discussion between the Tar Heel-born and bred Southerner and this epitome of a sharp-as-a-tack New England gentleman lawyer was great fun. Dee began work for WUNC-TV. Dick and Dee decided to move to Cary, epitomizing the acronym of CARE, Containment Area for Relocated Yankees. Cary benefited greatly from the presence of Dick Hatch. He taught seniors how to use computers at the Cary Senior Center. He delivered for Meals on Wheels in the community. He was president of the Friends of the Cary Senior Center and a member of the board of directors for Cary Senior Technology Education. He lent his deep bass voice to various local choirs. They attended and were active members in Cary Presbyterian Church. I was honored to introduce him to be sworn in under comity as a North Carolina lawyer in 1987. He was quite active in our Wake County Bar Association. I do not think he and Dee ever missed a Wake County Bar Christmas party or holiday party. But he provided pro bono legal services through the Wake County Bar Association Volunteer Lawyers Program. For a while, Dick served as counsel at SAS Institute. However, his senior New England-bred Ivy League wearing a tie every day to work mentality was not quite the thing for the SAS environment. He did like the cafeteria, but he was the only person there in a suit, except when I joined him for lunch a couple of times. So he decided to retire from corporate law. His retirement was wonderful for North Carolina, particularly for its senior citizens. He became involved with the AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons. He began advocating and lobbying for older adults, first as a member of AARP's legislative committee in North Carolina and later as its chair. He was a founding member for the North Carolina Coalition on Aging. He drafted its bylaws, which to my understanding are still in use today. He rose in the ranks from secretary to president of this coalition of more than 60 entities involved with the elderly in our state. Dick lobbied for senior causes in North Carolina and Washington, helping to craft and pass legislation for the elderly. His children believed this was the work that was most dear to him. He felt a great calling for these causes. His efforts as a defender of the elderly included efforts in the General Assembly opposing payday lending, opposing a surcharge on the retail sale of prescription drugs, and opposition to the conversion of Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina into a for-profit corporation. Some of the other laws he touched, always for the protection of the elderly, were eliminating the state tax on food purchases, restoring the state income tax credit for long-term care insurance premiums, authorizing pay-on-death registration of securities, authorizing a reverse mortgage law, establishing a rating system for adult care homes, and establishing a health care personnel registry with criminal background checks. Dick and his wife, Dee, were among the first to receive one of the Pathfinder Awards from the Coalition on Aging. In 2003, he received the AARP's prestigious Andrus Award for community service, which recognized his longtime contributions to improving the lives of older adults in North Carolina. Dick and Dee, married 30 June 1962, were a couple in advocacy, community service, and a challenging tennis doubles team. It was humiliating to be defeated by somebody older than your father. Dick and Dee were a strong, loving couple with a marriage which lasted 61 years until Dick passed away. Their union produced two successful, dutiful, and loving sons, Brian and Douglas. Brian is with us today. He lives here in North Carolina. Douglas and his wife, Tammy, who are unable to attend today, live outside the state, provided Dick with his much-loved granddaughters, Madison, Megan, and Cassidy, of whom he was very proud. Dick was truly a family man. He was fortunate that he was able to say goodbye to all his immediate family on the day of his passing on the 16th of July, 2023. Dick was a Christian, and he fulfilled the admonition of Christ in Luke chapter 12, verse 48, "To whom much has been given, much will be required." He gave to his family, his community, his profession, and to the elderly people of North Carolina. I respectfully thank you for this privilege of addressing you in memory of Richard C. Dick Hatch. Thank you.
Our final honoree today is Martin T. McCracken, and he will be remembered by James Aldean Webster.
Marty McCracken died at the too young age of 59. We have here in attendance some of his beloved family members, his mother June, lovely woman I've gotten to know through Marty, and his sister Caroline, who I have also gotten to know through Marty, and his Aunt Joyce. And I want to first kind of get things on the table by quoting or paraphrasing a couple of key points made by his sister Caroline about Marty. And the first was that Marty may not have loved a lot of people, but that those he did love, he loved deeply. And that was particularly true of his family, and I hope to address that in more detail later. Another point that Caroline made about Marty was that he was a person with a sense of honor and right and wrong. And we have observed that about Marty as well. A few other key personality traits that I hope to touch upon are his wit, which was amazing, acerbic, sometimes ribald. I may give a few examples. A tendency, you could say, to be bullheaded. I'm right, and if you don't agree with me, then you're an idiot, that sort of thing. And also some service throughout his life as well. But first, I'm going to get to an example of his sense of humor, but to do so, I want to give a little bit more of a background about some context. And I'll also fill in some more biographical details, I hope, at one time or another. But Marty, for his last 20 years, was a condemnation attorney in the Attorney General's office, representing the Department of Transportation. And in that capacity, probably all the lawyers in here may already know that, it's also referred to as eminent domain, having to do with representing DOT when it takes a property owner's property against their will, and then we have to go to court, usually on the subject of how much is owed in just compensation to the property owner. So a lot of times the big issue was the dollar amount, and it can be an interesting and complex issue, though Marty would sometimes say not. But when he became the head of the condemnation unit for the AG's office, he would sign, probably, or auto-sign, hundreds of these documents to institute the case. And this is a declaration of taking, in this instance, against McDonald's in Winston-Salem. This ended up being my case. And among other things, it's called a declaration of taking, and the amount deposited by DOT as its estimate of just compensation was $861,625, and it says that the said interest and area are hereby appropriated and vested in the plaintiff, Department of Transportation. Now, I'm going to relate that a little bit to Marty's sense of humor. And this is in the specific context of his dating life. And Marty would say, or had said, that one of his pickup lines with the ladies was, when he was in the Attorney General's office, was, yeah, I know I'm just a state employee with a pension, but I'm not a hedge fund manager and I don't own a hedge fund, but I do have the power of eminent domain. And that's just indicative of his sense of humor, and you could come up with hundreds of examples like that. A little more about his biography. He was raised in Asheville. Sister Caroline attended Asheville Reynolds High School, where he played football, and I want to tell a little story about that in a minute. Like Keith Kapp, I believe, over here, he earned the Moorhead Scholarship, extremely prestigious. There may even be a few other recipients in here, but that bespeaks very high credentials, and he took that scholarship and graduated from UNC in political science. Thereafter, he attended the prestigious law school at Emory University in Atlanta. Then did private practice in Atlanta, an insurance defense firm. Then opened his own firm in Charlotte, for some period of time, and then ended up in the Attorney General's office doing what he finished up his career doing. First in Asheville and later in Raleigh, most of the time in Raleigh. In that position, he was a litigator for most of his period in that office, doing trials all over the state. Many first in the mountain area where he was working, and then later on in the eastern part of the state, primarily. And Marty then achieved what I have understood to be a very important position in the office, which was the chief condemnation attorney for the Attorney General's office. And that, I liken that to being something like a managing partner of a big law firm, because there's a pretty good number of attorneys and staff that are answering to you, and these cases a lot of times could involve millions of dollars, just one case, and going up against some high-rolling attorneys from big firms and that sort of thing. So Marty had that responsibility for a number of years, and then later he went back to being a litigator, and that's what he was doing when he died. I'm going to talk a little more about a professional accomplishment, but I wanted to get back to his football. And this may be reminiscent of his mean streak, you could say, Marty had, but it's a telling characteristic, and I've remembered it now for probably 15 or more years. And that was, we're talking about, I played high school and football as Marty. I did too, but I think Marty was probably more successful than me. And he said I said, well, what position did you play, Marty? And he said, I played on the offensive line. And Marty is a big guy. I don't know his exact dimensions, but let's say 6'2", big shoulders. And so he was probably not going to be somebody to play a skilled position. So the line makes sense. But I said, Marty, why did you choose the offensive line? I mean, I would think if you're going to play on the line, you'd want to play on the defensive line, because that's the position where you might be making these heroic sacks of the quarterback and maybe forcing some fumbles and that sort. You might even make an interception or two. And Marty said, I like the offensive line because I like to hit people. And I think that may say something about Marty, and it's true, I guess, about if you're on the offensive line, you're the first one charging off the ball, so you make the first contact. But that's a little bit indicative of who Marty McCracken was. He liked to hit people. Now, another major development in his biography is that in the fall of 2022, Marty suffered a very severe stroke. And he was in the hospital, I think, for maybe 6 months or so, recovering. He actually made a good recovery considering the severity, if you had seen him at the outset and then how he progressed when he was finally released. But he did have some lingering symptoms from the stroke, even though he had returned to work and was leading a relatively normal life. And it may be that those are what eventually caused his death at his young age. But a couple of things, this is going along with the sort of funny aspects of Marty and the bullheaded aspects of Marty. But when he was in the hospital, recovering from a stroke, he knew I was coming to visit him, and he said, Dean, he was under a strict diet, because I think diet has had some impact probably on his having incurred the stroke. He said, Dean, I want you to get me a 12-piece from Popeyes. Thinking, Marty, I didn't say this, but I'm not really sure that's the best thing. But he, as I said, he was my supervisor at the time. So he's the boss, and so I brought him the 12-piece, which he inhaled. That was another characteristic of Marty. He was like the fastest eater I've ever seen. But that might be sort of the bullheaded part of Marty. And this is another example. When he was released from the hospital, after 6 months, I took him home. And we may have gone to lunch, I can't remember now, but I may have had the first lunch with Marty when we went out, but I don't know if it was that day. But so I'm taking him home, and prior to the stroke, Marty had been a smoker. And I don't know for how long he'd been a smoker, but he was a smoker. That obviously is not good for you in terms of your cardiovascular health, and may also have had something to do with a stroke. So he's been in the hospital for 6 months, and he's got these nurse ratchets or whatever watching over him, and he is not smoking for 6 months. So you sort of figure at that point Marty has kicked it. Well, the first place he wants to go to before we go home is to the drugstore for him to get a carton of cigarettes. And again, he was the boss, so I'm going to do what he said. But I first said, now, Marty, it's been 6 months. Do you really think you need to get cigarettes? And he said, yes, I want to get cigarettes. So he did get the carton of cigarettes at the drugstore on his way home from the hospital. But I am pleased to say I don't think he smoked many of them, and he went on to tell me later on that he did not resume smoking. So I was happy about that, but it just struck me that was one of the first things he wanted to do. Marty could be self-effacing as well as be bullheaded, so there's sort of two different sides of Marty in that respect. On the self-effacing aspect, he would, for example, he would admit to various of his failures in the practice of law and in cases and trials. And one of them he talked about was in the realm of search and seizure law in criminal cases, where he was representing the prosecution side about the curtilage, which has to do with the area around someone's house. And Marty said that there's like an entire body of jurisprudence of cases he lost in favor of the criminal defendants having to do with that particular issue of search and seizure. So it's kind of funny to hear him mention that. But now here's a success. And I won't get into too much detail about it because it's a little bit into the legalistic weeds, but this is the NCDOT versus Haywood County. Supreme Court of North Carolina, 2006, appearing for the department, Martin T. McCracken, for plaintiff appellant. Marty handled this case, I think, at the trial court level and at the Court of Appeals. He lost at the Court of Appeals. Marty took it up to the Supreme Court and got the Court of Appeals reversed unanimously by an opinion by Justice Edmonds. And just briefly about the case, it had to do with, there was a time in which at this time the courts were a little slack in what expert witnesses would be allowed to testify to. And they were sort of taking the position, well, once you qualify as an expert, we're not going to police much what opinions you're allowed to relay to the jury. We're just going to go ahead and defer to you. And there's a question about whether what we call the Daubert rule applied in North Carolina, and it was understood that it did not, and that would have been some constraint on experts, but it didn't apply at that time. It's since then been sort of codified. But Marty took this case up on the grounds that these experts just essentially rendered these opinions with no basis at all. I mean, one of them even said something like, well, I feel that this opinion is the correct one. And Marty had instituted some constraints on what experts can do in this Haywood County case. It's been cited many times by the appellate courts in North Carolina. I think many attorneys cite it in their briefs. I know our office does, and I think I've seen it cited against us as well. So that was one of his big accomplishments. Also about Marty's sense of humor, as Beth McKay has reminded me, there was a time when we were getting a little more high tech with our emails, and we were supposed to provide a profile photo for our email so people could see your face. And Marty was resistant. He may have contended, according to Beth, that he was too much of a Luddite to know how to do it. But then eventually what showed up as Marty's profile picture was a photograph of George Clooney. So that's just another typical example of Marty. Also, I had to go back and look at a few of my text messages with Marty, one of which was April 24, the date of his death. I don't see the time. I think it was like 10:30, and I had sent him an email that said lunch. Sadly, we never heard back from that one, but a lot of the text messages were about lunch, a highlight of our days. And this one is, I think this was kind of a touching one about Marty, a text message I got back when I had about a year ago a pulmonary embolism, which was attributed to some extent by misdiagnosis of what some of the medical people thought was just a pulled muscle, but it gravitated into my lung, and that can be fatal. It turned out not to be too bad for me, but I did miss a little bit of work. And Marty, I see that unsolicited, at that time, I got a text message from Marty, and he said, "How do you feel?" And this is after he'd had a stroke, so I think maybe he was conscious of the severity of the potential severity of the condition. And he said, "You need to take care of yourself, or I won't have anybody to eat lunch with." And I laughed and thanked him for checking in. And then we talked more about whether I had any dietary restrictions. And I said, "I don't think so." And he said, "Just tell me we don't have to start going to Sweet Green or something like that." And that's some kind of, I guess, a natural foods type dining establishment. He was hoping that would not now be our limitation. But anyway, I appreciated Marty touching base with me in that regard. Marty, I think, to me, I also think he has an aspect of the everyman lawyer or every woman lawyer that I would like to speak to briefly, and that is the Bar Association has a Joseph Branch Award for whom the recipients are typically somebody that everybody loves. The clients love them, the juries love them, and their employees love them, and they have to turn away clients, and they take on these cases of massive legal import. And not only that, they do tremendous amounts of pro bono work and have huge amounts of charitable donations and a lucrative practice and so forth. That seems to be kind of who we are honoring. And I wanted to think, well, we also need to look at the rest of us who don't reach those levels of excellence, and those of us who have to struggle with covering the overhead and making payroll and are not getting fired by a client and worrying about where client's going to come from and struggling with other kinds of demons. And that's why it's good to have these kinds of programs in which we can recognize lawyers like that. And I don't want to characterize Marty one way or the other. I don't think he was ever a nominee for the Joseph Branch, and probably was not exactly an Atticus Finch. But There was much to be said about him, and to wrap it up, just a couple of things. Again, about the love of his family. I was always impressed to hear Marty talking about he and his mother going down the Rhine River on a cruise throughout various countries in Europe and Germany. I thought that was a nice mother-son engagement. And Marty was a great dog lover. He bailed me out a few times as a supervisor, covering for me, and I appreciated that. He hired a great group of lawyers and staff when he was the supervisor. And then finally about Marty is, and this was, I put this in the heartwarming, inspirational, heartening category, and that is that there was a period of time in which Marty took under his wing the adopted daughter of our colleague Alexandra Hightower, Kay. And Marty was friends with Alex, and he took that upon himself. He would take Kay to lunch with us, and she was at that time working at DOT, and kind of shepherding her along, and tried to make sure she was at a suitable college. And I just always really respected Marty for having done that. So I just say, Marty, you had it in you. You left us too early. Quisquat in pace. Thank you.
That concludes our presentation. When I was a practicing lawyer and I would come to these sessions, I always left here feeling that I took something from it that would make me a better lawyer. And then when I became the chair of the committee and I was recently retired, I started thinking, young lawyers ought to be required to come to these sessions and see some of the qualities that these older lawyers exhibited. And now, after today's presentation, and now that I'm fully retired, I think, oh my goodness, I see so much that has inspired me that I can do in my retirement to help the community and the profession. So these were just wonderful presentations. I want to thank the Memorials Committee for their work in putting together and planning the program for today. I want to thank Jake Epstein, the president of our bar. I know he has a really busy schedule, and we appreciate you making time always to be here for these sessions. Appreciate your leadership. I also want to thank Judge Brian Collins, who just is so dedicated to these programs. He clears his schedule in advance to make sure that he can preside over them, and we just really appreciate everything that you do.
My pleasure.
I also want to thank Whitney Von Hom, the executive director of the bar, Nathaniel Adcock, our staff liaison. I want to thank the bailiff and the clerks, both bailiffs and the clerk, because it wouldn't be a court session without them. As you can see, the session was videotaped, so for you and for family members and friends who couldn't make it, it'll be posted, the video will be posted on the Wake County Bar Association YouTube website for posterity. Thank you again to all of you families for sharing your family members with us and for being here today.
Well, and the biggest thanks of all goes to Mary Winstead. She is our fearless leader. We just do what she tells us to do, and everything works out fine. So thank you, Mary. This courtroom's free for the rest of the day. I want to invite you to stay and visit with each other and enjoy each other's company. I learned a lot today. I actually didn't know any of these people, and I wish I had. So, Mr. Sheriff, would you please adjourn this special ceremonial session of the Wake County Superior Court? Sine die.
Yes, Your Honor. All rise, please stand. Oh, yes, the Honorable Superior Court is now adjourned. Sine die. God save the state, this honorable court. Safe home, everyone.
Thank you very much.